In the service industry of New York's Upper East Side, there existed an unwritten hierarchy of fear. At the very top, above celebrity tantrums and billionaire eccentrics, sat one name that made even veteran caterers fake illness: Dominic Cross. Cross didn't throw parties. He didn't host galas. When Dominic Cross ordered food, it meant someone was either being rewarded or reminded of their mortality. Christine White had heard the stories for 3 years, whispered over prep tables, and shared in hushed tones during smoke breaks. But stories didn't pay off medical debt. Stories didn't cover her sister's private school tuition. Stories certainly didn't silence the collection agencies that called her phone 6 times a day. So when the dispatcher's voice crackled through her cell at midnight on a Thursday, offering triple her usual rate for an immediate delivery to Cross Manor, Christine made a choice that would shatter every rule she'd lived by. She said yes. That decision, made in the fluorescent-lit kitchen of Marcello's bistro while her feet ached in shoes held together with superglue and hope, would lead her through security checkpoints designed to intimidate world leaders, into the presence of a man whose reputation preceded him like a funeral procession, and face-to-face with a monster that shouldn't exist. Because the beast that had hospitalized 4 trained killers, the animal Dominic Cross was prepared to execute like a failed investment, wasn't just any Pitbull. It was Shadow, her Shadow, the puppy that had vanished the night her mother died. And Christine White, staring into eyes that remembered her even through trauma and transformation, would have to choose between self-preservation and the last living connection to everything she'd lost. Welcome back, my loves. Before we continue, please tap the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and share this story with someone who needs it. Also, comment where you're watching from and what time it is. It helps the algorithm know you want more content like this. All right, let's dive in. Christine's catering shifts supplemented her waitress income, just enough to keep the electricity on in the studio apartment she shared with her 16-year-old sister in Astoria. The agency she worked for made it brutally clear that discretion purchased silence, and silence purchased survival in a city where curiosity could be terminal. But when the call came, not through the usual scheduling app, but directly to her personal number, every instinct Christine had spent 8 years hunting started screaming warnings she couldn't afford to hear. Christine White, the dispatcher's voice was tight with something that sounded like fear. We have an emergency situation. Client in the Diamond District. The address is... A pause. The address is 1147 Park Avenue, penthouse level. Do you know it? Christine's hand tightened around her phone. Everyone knew that address. It wasn't a residence. It was a fortress. Cross Manor sat in the heart of Manhattan's most exclusive neighborhood like a steel and marble warning to anyone who thought money could be separated from power. I know it, Christine said slowly. What's the rate? $1,500 for the delivery, cash on completion. But Christine, the dispatcher's voice dropped. He has a dog, a big one. They're very specific about that. You'll need to follow exact instructions. That should have been Christine's first warning. The second warning should have been the background check she had to clear before they'd even give her the pickup address. The third warning was the 2 SUVs that pulled up outside Marcello's, not delivery vehicles, but the kind of armored luxury that suggested their passengers expected trouble and were prepared to create it. But Sophia's tuition payment was due in 6 days. The hospital was threatening to send their mother's remaining debt to collections. And pride, as Christine had learned on her 24th birthday when she dropped out of her master's program to become a full-time waitress, was a luxury reserved for people who could afford consequences. The man who stepped out of the lead SUV wore a suit that cost more than Christine's annual rent. His eyes swept over her with the practiced assessment of someone who calculated threats the way other people calculated tips. Christine White. She nodded, her hands tightening on the insulated delivery bag. I'm Marcus Reeves, Mr. Cross's head of security. You'll ride with us. Your vehicle will be returned to this location when the delivery is complete. It wasn't a request. The drive took 17 minutes through streets that grew progressively quieter and exponentially more expensive. Marcus sat across from her in silence, his posture radiating the kind of controlled violence that came from military training and moral flexibility. Cross Manor announced itself with iron gates that looked decorative, until Christine noticed the sensor arrays and the subtle positions of armed guards in the shadows. The building itself was a study in intimidation, modern architecture that somehow managed to feel medieval, all sharp angles and tinted glass that reflected the city back at itself like a mirror warning against approach. They didn't park in the underground garage. The SUV pulled directly to a private entrance where an elevator waited, already open, as if the building itself had been watching their arrival. 3 rules, Marcus said as they stepped inside. Keep your eyes down unless Mr. Cross addresses you directly. Do not touch anything except what you're instructed to handle. And most importantly, his voice hardened, do not go near the kennels, under any circumstances, am I clear? Christine's mouth went dry. Crystal. The elevator climbed with the smooth silence of expensive machinery, the numbers ticking past until they stopped at a floor that didn't have a number, just a single word in brushed steel. Private. The doors opened onto a foyer that looked like it belonged in a European palace, all marble and dark wood and original art that Christine recognized from her abandoned art history degree. But she barely registered the opulence because standing in the center of the space, backlit by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan like a conquered empire, was Dominic Cross. He was younger than the rumors suggested, mid-30s, perhaps, with the kind of face that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Dark hair swept back from sharp features, a jawline that could cut glass, eyes the color of winter storms that tracked her movement with predatory focus. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing forearms marked with scars that told stories Christine suspected she didn't want to hear. "You're late," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and absolutely terrifying in its complete lack of inflection. "Traffic," Christine started. "I don't accept excuses." He moved toward her with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with violence. "I accept results or apologies. Which are you offering?" Christine lifted her chin, meeting those storm cloud eyes despite Marcus's warning. 8 years of surviving New York on minimum wage had burned away her ability to grovel. "Neither. I'm offering your dinner." Something flickered in Dominic's expression, surprise, maybe, or the beginning of interest. Before he could respond, a sound erupted from somewhere deeper in the penthouse. Not a bark, a roar. The kind of sound that belonged to something feral and enormous and absolutely murderous. "Sir," Marcus's hand moved toward his weapon. "The asset is active." Dominic's jaw tightened. "I told you to handle it." "We tried. Jenkins is in the ER. So is Tors. The animal won't let anyone within 15 feet. Marcus's voice carried a weight Christine couldn't interpret. "I think it's time we consider the permanent solution." "Show me," Dominic said coldly. They moved through the penthouse, Christine forgotten with her delivery bag growing cold in her hands. But something pulled her forward, not curiosity, but a recognition she didn't understand. That sound, the specific pitch and fury of it. She'd heard it before in dreams that woke her gasping. The kennel occupied what should have been a 3rd bedroom, converted into something between a high-security holding cell and an animal sanctuary. Heavy reinforced glass formed one wall, giving a clear view into a space that was far too luxurious to be called a cage. And inside, stalking the perimeter with hackles raised and teeth bared, was Nero. Christine's world tilted sideways. Time fractured. She wasn't standing in a penthouse anymore. She was 12 years old, curled in a hospital waiting room, being told her mother hadn't made it out of the fire. She was walking into their house, what remained of it, searching for the puppy her mother had run back inside to save. She was calling animal shelters for months, posting flyers, refusing to believe that Shadow was truly gone. Except Shadow wasn't gone. Shadow was here. 8 years older, 50 pounds heavier, covered in scars that made Christine's stomach clench with rage and grief, but unmistakable. The white marking on his chest shaped like a crescent moon. The slight notch in his left ear from where he'd caught it on a fence as a puppy. the specific golden flecks-in eyes that were now filled with trauma and fury. The delivery bag slipped from Christine's numb fingers, hitting the marble with a crash that echoed like gunfire. "Careless," Dominic said, his tone suggesting carelessness in his world had permanent consequences. Christine wasn't listening. She was moving toward the glass, her hand rising to press against it. Inside the kennel, Nero's head snapped toward her. The growling stopped. For one suspended heartbeat, the massive Pitbull stood absolutely still. "What are you doing?" Marcus's voice was sharp with alarm. "Step away from the glass." "That's my dog," Christine whispered. Then louder, turning to face Dominic Cross with 8 years of grief turning to steel in her spine. "That's my dog, Shadow. He was stolen the night my mother died. What the hell did you do to him?" Dominic's expression shifted from annoyance to something more dangerous, interest. "That animal was acquired from a breeder 2 years ago as a trained protection asset. He attacked his previous trainer and 3 of my men. He's scheduled for termination in—" He checked his watch with deliberate calm. "Approximately 7 minutes." "No," Christine turned back to the kennel. Behind the glass, Nero was shaking, a full-body tremor that spoke of recognition fighting against conditioning. Shadow, baby, it's me." "Miss White," Marcus had his weapon drawn now. "Step away from the containment area." But Christine was already moving toward the door, toward the keypad that would open it. Dominic's hand clamped on her wrist with crushing force. "That animal will kill you." Christine looked up at him, at this man who'd built an empire on fear and called a traumatized dog an asset. "Then I'll die knowing I tried, which is more than you're giving him." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that both of them understood what it meant to survive against impossible odds, to be shaped by violence into something harder than the world that tried to break them. Dominic released her wrist. "If you die, the cleanup will ruin my evening." "Noted," Christine said and opened the door. She stepped into the kennel where Nero waited, all teeth and muscle and barely contained rage. The door sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss. Somewhere outside, she heard Marcus swearing, heard Dominic's quiet command to stand down. Christine sank to her knees on the expensive flooring and opened her mouth. What emerged wasn't words. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing, a wordless melody in a language Christine had never learned, but had absorbed through love and repetition. The same song her mother had hummed, while Shadow had been a puppy falling asleep across her lap. "Shadow," she whispered between phrases. "Shadow, find the light." The massive Pitbull's ears flattened. The growling died in his throat. And then, moving like something breaking under its own weight, Nero crossed the space between them and collapsed against Christine's chest, whimpering like the puppy he'd been when the world had still made sense. Christine wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his scarred fur. Feeling 8 years of grief pouring out in tears she'd never let herself shed. Outside the glass, Dominic Cross stood absolutely still, watching the impossible with the expression of a man realizing his entire understanding of control had just been rewritten by a waitress in second-hand shoes who just tamed his deadliest weapon with a song. "Well," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of dangerous fascination. "That's interesting." Christine's phone buzzed against the stainless steel prep table at 11:47 p.m., the vibration cutting through the white noise of industrial dishwashers and the distant clatter of closing time cleanup. She'd been elbow-deep in sanitizer water, scrubbing down the service station for the 3rd time because Marcus, the night manager, had standards that bordered on pathological. Her feet screamed in shoes held together with superglue and willpower. Her back ached from 8 hours of carrying trays that seemed to gain weight with each passing year. But she had 43 minutes left on her shift, and 43 minutes meant another $7 before taxes. The number on the screen made her pause, not the catering agency's main line that always came through the app. This was direct, personal, the kind of call that meant either a massive tip or a massive problem. "Christine White," she answered, wedging the phone between her shoulder and ear while she continued scrubbing. "Christine," the dispatcher's voice was tight, clipped. Daria Chen had been routing catering jobs for 15 years and had the emotional range of a subway turnstile. But tonight, something bled through the professional monotone. Fear, maybe, or warning. "We have a situation, emergency delivery, high-value client. Are you available?" Christine's hand stilled on the rag. In 3 years of side hustling through Daria's agency, she'd learned to read the pauses between words. What kind of emergency? The kind that pays $1,500 for 90 minutes of work. The number hit Christine like cold water. $1,500. That was Sophia's tuition payment with enough left over for 2 weeks of groceries and maybe, a payment plan installment on the mountain of medical debt that had been growing since her mother's death like some malignant financial tumor. "What's the catch?" Christine asked, because in New York, every deal that sounded too good was too good. Another pause, longer this time. "The address is 1147 Park Avenue, penthouse level. The client's name is..." Daria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Dominic Cross." Christine's throat went dry. She set down the rag with careful precision, as if sudden movements might somehow confirm this conversation was actually happening. Every service worker in Manhattan knew that name. Dominic Cross wasn't a person. He was a force of nature wrapped in expensive suits and rumors that ended with people disappearing into the East River. "Daria, I'm a waitress who does side deliveries. I'm not." He specifically requested someone who doesn't work his usual events, someone with no connection to his world. "You fit the profile." Daria's words came faster now, like she was reading from a script she wanted to finish. "The pickup is from Lombardi's on Spring Street. They'll have the order ready in 20 minutes. You deliver to the penthouse, you collect payment from his security, you leave. That's it." "What's the actual catch?" Christine pressed. "Because nobody pays $1,500 for pasta delivery without a reason." "He has a dog." The words came out flat. "A large one. Security will brief you on protocols when you arrive." "Christine," Daria's professional mask cracked completely. "I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that 3 other contractors turned this down tonight. If you say no, I won't hold it against you. If you say yes, follow every instruction exactly as given. Do you understand what I'm actually saying?" Christine understood. She understood that this was the kind of job people whispered about. The kind where you either came back with more money than you'd seen in months, or you didn't come back at all. She understood that accepting meant stepping across a line that separated normal danger, late-night subway rides, walking through bad neighborhoods, from the kind of danger that had its own Wikipedia page. She also understood that Sophia's school would drop her from the roster in 6 days if the tuition payment didn't clear. That the hospital's final notice had arrived yesterday, printed on paper that somehow felt heavier than regular mail. That her mother had died trying to save their dog from a house fire, and Christine had spent 8 years afterward trying to save what remained of their family with nothing but minimum wage and sheer stubborn refusal to break. 8 years of treading water. 8 years of survival without living. 8 years of every decision coming down to the same brutal calculus. How much was safety worth when safety meant watching everything slip away in slow motion? "I'll take it," Christine said. "Christine." "I'll take it," she repeated, louder this time. Loud enough that Marcus looked up from his inventory sheets with a frown. "Text me the pickup details." Daria's exhale crackled through the phone speaker. "The car will be there in 30 minutes. Black SUV. They'll know who you are, and Christine, when you get there. Do not ask questions. Do not make small talk. Deliver the food, take the money, leave. Promise me." "I promise," Christine lied. Because she could already feel it. The way the universe bent around certain moments. The way some decisions echoed forward and backward through time. This wasn't just about money. This was about the woman she was tired of being. Careful, controlled, constantly calculating the cost of simply existing. Maybe it was time to find out what kind of woman she'd be if she stopped playing it safe. She hung up, stripped off her apron, and walked out of Marcello's bistro without saying goodbye. The night air hit her face like a promise and a threat. 30 minutes until the car arrived. 30 minutes until everything changed. The SUV that pulled up outside Lombardi's wasn't just black. It was the kind of black that absorbed light, that suggested bullet-resistant glass and reinforced panels, and a price tag that could fund a small country's GDP. Christine stood on the curb clutching the insulated delivery bag, watching her reflection distort across the tinted windows like a funhouse mirror warning her to run. The rear door opened from the inside. Christine White? The man who spoke wore a suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His eyes, pale gray, utterly empty of warmth, swept over her with the clinical assessment of someone who'd learned to calculate threats the way other people calculated tips. "I'm Marcus Reeves, Mr. Cross's head of security. Get in." It wasn't a request. Christine climbed into leather seats that probably came from cows that died of old age in Italian pastures, the delivery bag awkward on her lap. Marcus slid in beside her, maintaining exactly 18 inches of distance. Professional, precise, terrifying in his complete lack of emotion. The driver pulled into traffic without a word. "3 rules," Marcus said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone who'd given this speech before and expected it to be followed. "First, when we arrive, you'll be escorted through security. Answer all questions honestly. Any deception will be detected and will result in immediate termination of this arrangement." Christine's fingers tightened on the delivery bag. She had a feeling termination meant more than just losing the job. "Second, Mr. Cross does not engage in small talk. You'll deliver the food to the location specified. You will not speak unless directly addressed. You will not touch anything except what you're instructed to handle." "And third?" Christine asked, adding how her voice came out smaller than she intended. Marcus turned to look at her fully for the first time. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes suggested he was delivering the only warning she'd receive. "Do not, under any circumstances, go near the kennels. Mr. Cross has an animal, a large one. It's not friendly. 4 men have been hospitalized in the past month. If you hear barking, you walk in the opposite direction. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Christine said, though her mind was already cataloging the word choices. Not a dog, an animal, not his pet. An animal he has. The distinction felt important in ways she couldn't articulate. The drive took 17 minutes through streets that grew progressively quieter as the buildings grew progressively taller and more expensive. Manhattan had layers: the tourist layer, the working layer, the wealthy layer, and they were clearly ascending into stratosphere Christine had only seen in movies and through restaurant windows while delivering food to people who treated her like sentient furniture. Cross Manor announced itself with gates that looked decorative until Christine noticed the cameras, the sensors, the subtle positions of armed guards in shadows that suddenly seemed very deliberately placed. The building itself rose like a monument to power, all sharp angles and dark glass that reflected the city back at itself in fragmented pieces. They didn't use the main entrance. The SUV pulled into a private bay where an elevator stood open, as if the building itself had been expecting them. Inside, the walls were burnished steel, and the panel showed floors that went higher than Christine had realized buildings in this neighborhood were allowed to go. Marcus pressed his palm against a biometric scanner. The elevator began to climb with the whisper-quiet precision of expensive machinery. "He's younger than people think," Marcus said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the ascending numbers. "That makes people underestimate him. Don't." The elevator opened onto a foyer that looked like it had been stolen from Versailles and reconstructed with modern materials and ruthless efficiency. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Crown molding that probably cost more than her apartment. Original artwork that Christine recognized from her abandoned art history degree. A Rothko, a Basquiat, what looked suspiciously like an actual Caravaggio. But she barely registered the opulence because standing in the center of the space, backlit by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan like a conquered kingdom, was Dominic Cross. He was nothing like the rumors suggested. The whispered stories painted a monster, old, scarred, ugly with violence and age. But the man watching her approach couldn't have been more than 35, with the kind of face that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Dark hair swept back from sharp, elegant features, a jawline that could cut glass, eyes the color of winter storms that tracked her movement with predatory precision. He wore black shirt, slacks, everything black except for the subtle gleam of a watch that probably cost more than her mother's final hospital bill. The sleeves were rolled to his forearms, revealing scars that told stories Christine suspected she didn't want to hear. Knife wounds, maybe. Burns. The kind of marks that came from surviving things that should have killed you. "You're late," he said. His voice was cultured, smooth, with the barest hint of an accent Christine couldn't place. British boarding school filtered through something older, darker. Christine checked her phone. "I'm 3 minutes early." "I expected you 5 minutes ago." Dominic moved toward her with liquid grace, each step deliberate and controlled. "In my world, expectations are reality. You're late." Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to grovel, to do whatever it took to appease this man who radiated danger like heat from asphalt in August. But 8 years of swallowing her pride for rent money and survival had left her with a core of stubbornness that apparently had a death wish. "In my world," Christine said, meeting those storm cloud eyes, "early is on time, so I guess we live in different worlds." The silence that followed felt like standing on train tracks while hearing a distant whistle. Then Dominic smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. How refreshing, someone with a spine. From somewhere deeper in the penthouse, a sound erupted that made Christine's blood freeze. Not a bark, a roar. Rage and pain compressed into sound waves that rattled the expensive artwork on the walls. Marcus's hand moved toward his concealed weapon. "Sir, the asset is active again." Dominic's smile vanished like it had never existed. "Show me." And Christine, still clutching her delivery bag like a shield, followed them deeper into the beautiful, terrible heart of Cross Manor, pulled forward by something she didn't understand but couldn't resist. The sound came again, closer now. Familiar in ways that made her chest ache with impossible recognition. They moved through the penthouse like a funeral procession, Dominic leading with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to occupy space, Marcus flanking with his hand resting on his weapon, and Christine trailing behind with her delivery bag growing cold, and her heart hammering against her ribs in a rhythm that felt like warning, warning, warning. The roaring came again, closer now, reverberating through walls that probably cost a fortune to soundproof. It was the sound of something broken trying to break everything else, rage compressed into acoustic waves that made Christine's teeth ache. "What is that?" she asked, though some part of her already knew. Already recognized something in the specific pitch and fury that pulled at memories she'd buried under 8 years of survival. "A mistake," Dominic said without turning around. "An investment that failed to yield returns. I don't tolerate failure, Miss White. It's expensive and infectious." They stopped at a door that looked like all the others, unmarked, elegant, utterly unremarkable except for the keypad beside it, and the reinforced frame Christine noticed when light hit it from the right angle. Marcus entered a code with practiced efficiency. The lock disengaged with a hydraulic hiss that suggested this wasn't just a door but a containment system. The room beyond should have been a bedroom, probably was, in the building's original design. Instead, it had been converted into something between a high-security holding cell and a luxury animal habitat. One wall was floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, thick enough that Christine could see the subtle distortion that marked it as bulletproof. The space beyond held everything a dog could need. Cushioned bedding, water stations, even what looked like climate control vents. But the creature stalking the perimeter wasn't interested in comfort. Nero was massive, easily 90 pounds of muscle and fury, his black coat marked with scars that told stories of violence Christine's mind shied away from interpreting. His hackles were raised, lips pulled back to reveal teeth that belonged in nightmares. He moved with the restless energy of something caged too long, something that had learned that everything beyond the glass meant pain. "Beautiful, isn't he?" Dominic stepped closer to the glass, completely unbothered by the fact that the animal on the other side looked like he wanted to tear through steel to reach them. I acquired him 2 years ago from a breeder who specializes in protection animals. Cost more than most people make in a year. He was supposed to be trained, disciplined, responsive, lethal on command. What happened? Christine asked, though she couldn't tear her eyes away from the dog. Something about him pulled at her, tugged at memories that felt like ghosts trying to become solid. He bit his trainer, sent him to the hospital with a shattered forearm and 60 stitches. I thought it was the trainer's failure, weakness, improper technique. So I brought him here, assigned my best men to continue his training. Dominic's voice remained utterly flat, reciting facts without emotion. In the past month, he's hospitalized 4 of them. Tor's lost 3 fingers. Jenkins has a reconstructed jaw. The animal is unpredictable, violent, and ultimately useless. So you're going to kill him, Christine said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to solve a problem. Dominic finally turned to look at her, those winter storm eyes assessing her reaction with clinical interest. Unless you have some insight into why a professionally trained protection animal devolves into random violence. Christine moved closer to the glass, her delivery bag slipping forgotten from her hands. Inside the kennel, Nero's head snapped toward her, yellow eyes tracking the movement. The growling intensified, a sound that should have sent her running, but instead made her chest tighten with something that felt horribly like recognition. Random, she whispered. You think it's random. She pressed her palm against the glass. Nero lunged toward it, teeth bared but stopped inches away. Not attacking, investigating. His nostrils flared, taking in whatever scent might penetrate the barrier between them. And Christine saw it. The white marking on his chest, partially obscured by scarring but unmistakable once you knew to look for it, shaped like a crescent moon. The slight notch in his left ear. The specific golden flex-in eyes that were currently wild with trauma, but that she'd once watched close in puppy sleep across her lap. The world tilted sideways. Time did something strange, collapsed in on itself like a dying star. She wasn't standing in a penthouse anymore. She was 12 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room while nurses whispered about smoke inhalation and burn percentages, and how sometimes the heart just stops. She was walking into what remained of their house, calling for Shadow, searching through debris and ash while neighbors watched with pity in their eyes. She was stapling flyers to telephone poles with a picture of a puppy who'd been stolen during the chaos of her family falling apart, calling shelters until they stopped answering, refusing to believe he was gone until grief exhausted her into numb acceptance. Except he wasn't gone. He was here. 8 years older, 50 pounds heavier, covered in scars that made her stomach clench with fury and grief so intense it felt like drowning. But here, alive, transformed into a weapon by people who'd never known him as anything but a tool. Shadow, she breathed against the glass. The massive Pitbull went completely still. The growling cut off like someone had flipped a switch. For one suspended moment, 90 pounds of traumatized muscle and rage stood frozen, ears swiveling toward the sound of a name he shouldn't remember. What did you say? Dominic's voice came from very close behind her, sharp with sudden attention. Christine turned to face him, and she knew her expression must have looked unhinged because Marcus's hand moved fully to his weapon and Dominic's posture shifted into something that suggested he was reassessing whether she was a threat. That's my dog, she said. Each word felt like pulling glass from a wound. Shadow, he was stolen from my backyard 8 years ago, the night my mother died. The night she ran back into our burning house to try to save him and never came out. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, calculation or curiosity or maybe just the recognition that the evening had become unexpectedly interesting. That's not possible. This animal was purchased from a registered breeder with full documentation. Look at his chest, Christine interrupted, her voice rising. The white marking shaped like a crescent moon. Look at his left ear. There's a notch from where he caught it on our fence when he was 4 months old. That is my dog. What the hell did you do to him? Behind the glass, Nero, Shadow, began to shake. A full-body tremor that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with recognition fighting against years of trauma and conditioning. Miss White, Marcus said carefully, You need to step away from the containment area." But Christine was already moving toward the keypad, toward the door that would open the glass, toward 8 years of grief crystallizing into this single moment of impossible reunion. Dominic's hand clamped on her wrist with crushing force. "That animal will kill you." Christine looked up at him, at this man who'd built an empire on violence and fear, who called traumatized creatures assets and investments, and felt something in her chest break open. "Then I'll die knowing I tried," she said, "which is more than you're giving him." Dominic held her wrist for 3 more seconds, his grip iron and immovable, his eyes searching hers for something she couldn't name. Whatever he found there made him release her with a sound that might have been a laugh or a curse. "Your funeral," he said, stepping back. Then to Marcus, "If it goes badly, 1 shot, clean, I don't want blood on the glass." "Sir," Marcus's voice carried a note Christine had never heard from him before, actual concern. "We should contain this situation differently. There are protocols." "The protocols have failed." Dominic's attention never left Christine's face. "I want to see what happens when we stop following rules that don't work. Consider this a field experiment." Christine's hands shook as she reached for the keypad. The code was still displayed from when Marcus had opened the outer door, 6 digits that separated her from either reunion or death. She pressed them one by one, each beep feeling like a countdown to something irreversible. The lock disengaged. The glass door slid open with a whisper of expensive hydraulics. Inside the kennel, Shadow stopped trembling and went utterly still. His yellow eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that could have been recognition or predatory focus or both. The muscles in his shoulders bunched. His weight shifted forward onto his front paws. Behind her, she heard the distinctive sound of a safety clicking off. Marcus, preparing for the inevitable. Christine stepped through the door. It sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a tomb closing. The world narrowed to this. Reinforced walls, climate-controlled air that smelled like expensive dog food and fear, and 90 pounds of traumatized animal watching her with eyes that held 8 years of pain she couldn't begin to imagine. This close, she could see every scar. Burns along his flanks, what looked like electrical marks near his collar. Cuts that had healed badly, leaving raised ridges across muscle that shouldn't belong to a creature who'd once fit in her lap. What had they done to him? What had they made him into? Shadow's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that could crush bone. A growl started low in his chest, not the rage from before, but something more complex. Warning mixed with confusion, mixed with something that sounded horribly like hope trying to survive inside something that had learned hope was dangerous. "Shadow," Christine whispered, and her voice cracked on the name. She sank to her knees on flooring that probably cost more per square foot than her monthly rent, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Shadow, baby, it's me." The growling intensified. Shadow took a step forward, then another, moving with the stalking precision of something that had been trained to kill. His head lowered. His shoulders rolled with barely contained violence. Outside the glass, Marcus's voice came through speakers Christine hadn't noticed. "Miss White, stand up slowly and move toward the door. Do it now." But Christine wasn't moving. She was reaching back through 8 years of grief to find the memory of her mother's voice. The lullaby she'd sung every night when Shadow had been too anxious to sleep, when thunderstorms had made him shake, when the world had seemed too big and frightening for a puppy who'd been born to a life that should have been gentler. Christine opened her mouth and began to sing. It wasn't a song with words. Her mother had said it was something her own grandmother had taught her, passed down through generations in a language that had been lost to time but survived in melody. Wordless phrases that rose and fell like breathing, like heartbeat, like the rhythm of being rocked in arms that meant safety. Shadow's ears swiveled forward. The growling cut off mid-note. Christine kept singing, her voice rough from years of not using it for anything, but taking orders and apologizing for things that weren't her fault. But the melody was still there, buried under survival and silence. It emerged like something excavated from ruins, damaged but recognizable, carrying the ghost of her mother's voice underneath her own. "Shadow," she sang whispered between phrases. Shadow, find the light. Those had been the words her mother used, not a command but a reminder. When Shadow had been scared, when he'd hidden under furniture or trembled at loud noises, her mother would kneel down and say it like a promise. Find the light. I'm here. You're safe. Find the light. The massive Pitbull took another step forward. His entire body was shaking now, tremors that started in his legs and spread upward until even his jaw quivered. The teeth were still bared, but the rage behind them was fracturing into something else. Something that looked like a creature being torn in half between what he'd been made into and what he'd been born as. Christine held out her hand, palm up, not reaching but offering. Find the light, baby. I'm here. I never stopped looking for you. Find the light. Shadow's legs buckled. The fierce, trained killer that had put 4 men in the hospital collapsed like something breaking under its own weight. He crawled the remaining distance between them, not attacking but surrendering, and pressed his massive, scarred head against Christine's chest. The sound that came out of him wasn't a growl. It was a keening whimper, high and desperate and full of a grief that matched her own. His entire body shook against hers, 90 pounds of muscle and trauma dissolving into the puppy who'd once fallen asleep with his nose tucked under her chin. Christine wrapped her arms around him and felt 8 years of locked-away grief pour out of her in tears that soaked into his fur. I looked for you, she whispered against his neck, feeling the racing pulse under scarred skin. I looked everywhere. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't find you. Shadow pressed harder against her, trying to crawl into her lap the way he had when he'd been small enough to carry. He whimpered and shook and made sounds that dogs shouldn't be able to make, sounds of recognition and relief and agony, all compressed into frequencies that bypassed Christine's brain and went straight to her heart. Outside the glass, the world had gone silent. No voices through the speakers, no movement that Christine could see through her tears, just stillness that felt like the universe holding its breath. Then Dominic's voice, soft and strange and carrying a note she couldn't interpret. Well, that's interesting. Christine looked up through the reinforced glass to find him standing with his hand frozen halfway to his pocket, his expression completely unreadable. Marcus had lowered his weapon, but looked like he was watching a magic trick he couldn't explain and didn't trust. Shadow whimpered again and pressed closer, and Christine felt something in her chest that had been frozen for 8 years crack open. Not breaking. Thawing. The ice of survival melting into something that felt dangerously like hope. You're not killing him, she said, her voice carrying clearly through whatever speakers connected the kennel to the outside world. Not a question. Not a request. A statement of fact delivered by someone who just stepped through the glass and discovered she was willing to die for this. Dominic tilted his head, studying her the way someone might study a fascinating problem that had just revealed unexpected variables. No, he said slowly, each word measured and deliberate. I don't believe I am. He smiled then, not the cold thing from before, but something genuinely intrigued. Tell me, Miss White, how much do you think your time is worth? And Christine, kneeling on expensive flooring with her arms wrapped around the traumatized weapon Dominic Cross had planned to execute, felt the world shift underneath her in ways she was only beginning to understand. More than you can afford, she said. Dominic's smile widened. We'll see. The glass door opened with that same hydraulic whisper, but Christine didn't move. Shadow, she refused to think of him as Nero, refused to accept the name violence had given him, had finally stopped shaking and now lay with his head in her lap, his yellow eyes half closed in something that looked like the first peace he'd known in years. Every few seconds, a tremor would run through him, muscle memory of trauma that wouldn't release its grip so easily. Miss White, Dominic's voice carried the same controlled menace as before, but underneath it ran something new. Curiosity, maybe, or the calculation of a man who just watched his understanding of control get rewritten by a waitress in second-hand shoes. I'd like you to step out of the kennel now, slowly. No, Christine said without looking up. Her fingers moved through Shadow's fur, finding the patterns of scars, cataloging each one like evidence in a crime she intended to solve. Burns here, bite marks there, something that looked like it came from a shock collar near his throat. That wasn't a request. Then make it one. Christine finally raised her eyes to meet his through the glass. Because I'm not leaving him, not now, not after I just found him. Something flickered across Dominic's face. Surprise, maybe, or the recognition that he'd encountered a form of stubbornness that matched his own. He stepped into the kennel with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to occupy any space he chose. Shadow's head lifted immediately, ears back, a warning growl rumbling low in his chest. "Shadow, easy," Christine murmured, her hand moving to rest on his head. "Easy, baby." The growling stopped. Shadow's eyes tracked Dominic's movement, but he didn't lunge, didn't attack. Just watched with the wary attention of something that had learned to calculate threats with mathematical precision. Dominic stopped 6 feet away, his expression unreadable. He should have torn my throat out by now. Tors got within 10 feet before he lost his fingers. Because Tors probably approached him like a threat, Christine said. Like something to be dominated. Shadow's not a weapon. He's a traumatized animal who's been tortured into aggression. "Shadow," Dominic said the name like he was testing the weight of it. "You're certain this is your dog?" "I'm certain someone stole him 8 years ago and turned him into this. I'm certain you paid money for something that was stolen from a child whose mother had just died. I'm certain that whatever your breeder told you was a lie." Christine's voice hardened. "The question is what you're going to do about it." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Christine and the dog that had somehow transformed from lethal liability to something resembling a pet under her touch. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of decision that made the air in the kennel feel suddenly heavier. "I have a proposal for you, Miss White. I'm not interested in." "You'll want to hear this one." Dominic moved closer, slowly, telegraphing his movements in a way that suggested he'd learned something from watching her with Shadow. "I'm a practical man. I don't believe in miracles or magic or whatever you just did here, which means there's a logical explanation for why a dog that's been deemed untrainable by 4 professionals just surrendered to you like a puppy." "Love," Christine said flatly. "The explanation is love. He remembers being loved." "Perhaps," Dominic tilted his head. "Or perhaps there's something in your approach, your methodology, your technique, that could be studied and replicated. I've invested considerable resources in this animal. Before tonight, he was worthless. Now, suddenly, he has potential again. That interests me." Christine's arms tightened around Shadow. "He's not an investment. He's not potential. He's a living thing that's been traumatized. He's also legally my property, purchased through legitimate channels." Dominic's voice remained perfectly level, but Christine heard the iron underneath. "Which means I have options. I could have him destroyed as originally planned. I could sell him to someone else who specializes in difficult animals. Or," his eyes locked onto hers, "I could hire you to rehabilitate him." "I'm not a dog trainer. I'm a waitress." "You're whatever I need you to be if the price is right." Dominic pulled out his phone with a gesture so casual it took Christine a moment to realize what he was showing her. Her sister's school website. Sophia's student profile. Payment history showing red. Christine's blood went cold. "How did you?" "I know about the tuition payment due in 6 days. I know about your mother's medical debt, $83,000 still outstanding. I know you dropped out of Columbia 3 semesters short of your master's in psychology because you couldn't afford both your education and your sister's." Dominic's voice remained utterly flat, reciting facts without judgment. "I know you work 60-hour weeks split between Marcello's Bistro and this catering agency. I know your landlord is threatening eviction. I know everything about you, Miss White, because I make it my business to know everything about anyone who enters my home." Shadow growled again, sensing Christine's fear, but she kept her hand steady on his head. "That's supposed to convince me to work for you, showing me that you've invaded my privacy." "It's supposed to convince you that I'm serious." Dominic pocketed his phone. "Here's my offer. You stay here as Nero's as Shadow's handler. You work with him daily until he's reliable again. I'll pay you $5,000 a week, plus room and board in a guest suite. Your sister's tuition will be paid in full for the rest of her high school career. Your mother's medical debt will be settled within 30 days. The numbers hit Christine like physical blows. $5,000 a week. That was more than she made in 2 months. Sophia's tuition paid. That was 3 years of financial terror erased in a sentence. The medical debt gone. That was the weight that had been crushing her since her mother's death, lifted. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though they both knew she couldn't afford to. Dominic's smile was razor-thin. "Then you collect your $1,500 for tonight's delivery, you leave, and you never see your dog again. I'll find another solution to my problem. You'll find another way to solve yours." He paused. "Or rather, you won't, because we both know you're drowning, Miss White. I'm offering you air." Christine looked down at Shadow, at the scars that mapped his body like a memoir written in pain. She thought about Sophia, brilliant and 16, and deserving a future that didn't involve sacrificing her dreams the way Christine had. She thought about her mother, who died trying to save this dog, who would have wanted him safe more than anything. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Until I'm satisfied he's reliable, or until you fail to produce results, whichever comes first. I want it in writing, every promise you just made." "Done." Dominic extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" Christine looked at that hand, elegant, scarred, belonging to a man who'd built an empire on violence and viewed people as assets to be leveraged. Accepting it meant stepping fully into his world, meant becoming complicit in whatever darkness he represented. Refusing it meant watching Sophia's future crumble, meant never seeing Shadow again, meant returning to the slow drowning that had defined the past 8 years. Her mother had run into a burning building for this dog. Christine could survive a few weeks in a cage that looked like luxury. She took Dominic's hand. His grip was firm, his skin surprisingly warm. "I have a condition," she said. "No one touches him but me. No one trains him, tests him, or goes near him without my explicit permission. He's been hurt enough." Something that might have been respect flickered in Dominic's eyes. "Agreed. Welcome to Cross Manor, Miss White. I think you'll find your stay here very educational." He released her hand and walked out of the kennel, leaving Christine kneeling on expensive flooring with her arms around a traumatized dog and the growing certainty that she'd just made a deal with something far more dangerous than she understood. Shadow pressed closer against her legs, whimpering softly. "I know," Christine whispered. "I'm scared too." The guest suite Dominic assigned her occupied the entire west wing of the penthouse, 2 rooms larger than her apartment in Queens, decorated in shades of cream and silver that probably had designer names Christine didn't know. Floor to ceiling, windows overlooked Central Park like a painting, commissioned specifically to remind her how far she'd climbed into a world where she didn't belong. The closet held clothes in her exact size, still tagged, ranging from casual wear to evening gowns she couldn't imagine having occasion to use. Someone had measured her without her knowledge, purchased an entire wardrobe without her input, and arranged it all with the efficiency of people accustomed to making others' decisions for them. She'd been in Cross Manor for 6 hours and already felt like a specimen in an expensive cage. Shadow's rehabilitation space had been moved adjacent to her suite, the kennel expanded, reinforced, and equipped with everything Christine had requested and several things she hadn't known to ask for. Veterinary-grade medical supplies, specialized training equipment, a tablet loaded with behavioral modification literature that suggested Dominic or someone in his employ understood more about trauma recovery than she'd expected. It was 3 a.m. when Christine finally left Shadow sleeping, actual sleep, not the tense half-awareness he'd shown before, and ventured into the penthouse's kitchen in search of food she'd been too anxious to eat earlier. The space was industrial and immaculate, all stainless steel and marble, designed for a staff that apparently didn't work night hours. She was halfway through making tea when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're either very brave or very stupid." The voice was male, Italian accented, carrying the kind of casual threat that suggested its owner had significant practice with violence. "Most people don't wander Dominic's home at night." Christine turned to find a man in his 40s leaning against the doorframe, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with assessment. Expensive suit despite the hour. shoulder holster visible under his jacket. The kind of face that had probably been handsome before life had carved hard lessons into it. "I'm hungry," Christine said, keeping her voice level. "I was told I had access to the kitchen." "You were told you had access to your suite and the dog's space. Everything else requires permission." He moved into the kitchen with predatory grace, helping himself to espresso from a machine that probably cost more than a car. "I'm Marco, Dominic's second, the man who keeps this operation running while he indulges expensive experiments." "Is that what I am? An experiment?" "You're a curiosity." Marco's eyes traveled over her with clinical assessment. "A waitress who walks into a killer dog's cage and walks out alive, who negotiates with Dominic like she has leverage when we both know she has none. Either you're exceptionally clever or you don't understand how much danger you're in." Christine poured her tea with hands that wanted to shake, but refused to give him the satisfaction. "Shadow's not a killer dog. He's traumatized." "Shadow," Marco laughed without humor. "You named it. That's adorable. Tell me, does your sentimentality extend to understanding what kind of man you're working for?" "I understand enough." "Do you?" Marco set down his espresso cup with careful precision. "Dominic's father tried to kill him when he was 19, arranged an ambush that killed his mother instead. Do you know what Dominic did? He didn't just eliminate his father. He dismantled everything the old man built and reconstructed it in his own image. He turned betrayal into an empire. And now you think you can soften him, reform him through the power of puppy love." "I think I can rehabilitate a dog," Christine said coldly. "What Dominic does with that is his business." "Wrong," Marco's voice hardened. "What Dominic does becomes everyone's business. People are watching this, watching him show weakness by keeping a useless animal, by hearing some girl off the street, by deviating from patterns that have kept him alive for 15 years. Weakness attracts predators, Miss White. And when they come, your dog won't be what they're aiming for." Before Christine could respond, another voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Marco, are you threatening our guest?" The woman who entered moved like violence wrapped in haute couture, tall, striking, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that calculated threats with mathematical precision. Her suit was black Armani, tailored to conceal what Christine suspected was at least one weapon. Everything about her screamed danger and competence in equal measure. "Valentina." Marco's posture shifted slightly, not quite deference but acknowledgement of an equal. "I was simply explaining the reality of her situation." "By cornering her in the kitchen at 3 a.m. Valentina's smile was razor-thin. "How thoughtful." She turned to Christine. "I'm Valentina Russo. I handle legal affairs for Mr. Cross, which means I'm the one who drafted your contract, processed your background check, and will be monitoring your progress with the asset." "His name is Shadow," Christine said, tired of the dehumanization. "And I'm not an idiot. I know working for a man like Dominic Cross means navigating people who view threats as conversation starters. But I'm here for the dog, not office politics." Something flickered in Valentina's expression, surprise or possibly respect. How refreshingly direct. "Marco, Dominic wants the security reports for the Volkov meeting on his desk by 6. I suggest you spend your energy on that rather than intimidating staff." Marco's jaw tightened, but he nodded and left without another word. The kitchen felt larger without his presence, but no less dangerous. Valentina poured herself wine from a bottle that probably cost more than Christine's monthly rent. "A word of advice, since you seem determined to survive here. Dominic doesn't trust easily. His father's betrayal taught him that family is a liability and loyalty is a fiction people tell themselves before they're disappointed. The only thing he trusts is leverage, knowing what people want and controlling their access to it." "Is that supposed to make me feel better about working for him?" "It's supposed to help you understand why he's keeping you close." Valentina's eyes held a warning Christine couldn't quite interpret. "You did something no one else could with that dog, which means you have value. But value in Dominic's world is a double-edged sword. It makes you useful. It also makes you a target." Christine thought about Dominic's isolation, the fortress he'd built not just with steel and glass, but with distance and control. A man who'd learned at 19 that even blood could betray you, who'd spent 15 years ensuring he never needed anyone enough to be vulnerable. "He's lonely," Christine said quietly. Valentina's laugh was sharp and bitter. "He's a king in a castle made of corpses. Loneliness is the price of the crown." She finished her wine in one swallow. "Get some sleep, Miss White. Tomorrow you'll start earning your very generous salary. And try not to mistake Dominic's interest for anything softer than what it is, a predator studying something that briefly confused him." She left Christine alone in the kitchen with cold tea and the growing understanding that she'd entered a world where every interaction was a test, and failure had permanent consequences. Shadow was still sleeping when she returned to her suite. She curled up on the floor beside his space, close enough to hear his breathing, and wondered which of them was actually in the cage. 3 weeks into her captivity, because that's what it was, regardless of the salary and the silk sheets, Christine had established a routine that made cross-manners chaos feel almost manageable. She woke at 6, worked with Shadow until noon, took lunch in her suite while reviewing behavioral psychology texts, then returned to the kennel for afternoon sessions. Evenings were hers, supposedly, though she usually spent them with Shadow, watching him slowly remember how to exist without calculating every threat. The transformation was gradual and imperfect. Shadow still flinched at sudden movements, still positioned himself between Christine and doorways, his body a scarred shield against dangers only he could see. But the violence was receding, replaced by something gentler. He'd started playing tentatively, as if he'd forgotten the rules, with toys Christine had requested. He slept through the nights now, his breathing steady instead of that half-aware panting that spoke of nightmares. What Christine hadn't expected was Dominic's presence becoming part of the routine. He'd started appearing in the kennel's observation area during her sessions, watching through the glass with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Not the clinical assessment from those first days, but something more personal. Curious. He never interrupted, never offered suggestions, just observed with the focus of someone studying a language they'd never learned to speak. On the 23rd day, he entered the kennel itself. Shadow's reaction was immediate, ears back, a low warning growl, body tensing for violence. But he didn't lunge, didn't attack, just positioned himself between Christine and the perceived threat, waiting for her cue. "Shadow, easy," Christine murmured, her hand resting on his head. "He's not here to hurt us." "How do you do that?" Dominic asked, stopping a careful distance away. He'd shed his usual armor of expensive suits for dark jeans and a black shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal those scarred forearms. Somehow the casual clothes made him more dangerous, not less. More human. 3 weeks ago, he would have torn through reinforced glass to reach me. Now he's taking orders from you. "They're not orders. They're requests from someone he trusts." Christine continued the slow, methodical brushing she'd been doing, working through Shadow's coat while checking for any new injuries or stress indicators. Trust isn't built through dominance. It's built through consistency and proving you're safe. Dominic moved closer, slowly, telegraphing his movements the way she'd taught him during their brief interactions. Shadow's growl intensified, but he held position, his yellow eyes tracking every step. "Your methods contradict everything I was taught about control," Dominic said. "Maybe that's the problem." Christine looked up at him. "You can't control trauma. You can only create space for healing and hope the wounded thing chooses to trust you." Something flickered across Dominic's face, recognition or pain, or perhaps both. He lowered himself to sit on the floor 6 feet away, his posture open and unthreatening. Shadow's ears swiveled forward, confusion replacing aggression. "My mother died when I was 19, Dominic said abruptly. "My father ordered it. He saw me as a threat, too ambitious, too unwilling to follow his outdated methods. So he arranged an ambush. She was collateral damage. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong son who loved her enough to never forgive it." Christine's hands stilled in Shadow's fur. Dominic never talked about himself, never revealed anything beyond the cold, controlled persona he showed the world. This felt like watching armor crack. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be, I'm not." His voice remained flat, but his eyes betrayed him, winter storms with lightning underneath. I killed him 3 months later, took everything he built and burned it down to foundations. Then I built this." He gestured vaguely at the penthouse beyond the kennel walls. "An empire where betrayal has consequences and weakness is eliminated before it metastasizes." "Is that why you were going to kill Shadow? Because weakness is unacceptable." "I was going to kill an asset that failed to perform its function." Dominic's gaze moved to the dog, then back to Christine. "You taught me to see something else, a creature shaped by trauma, not defined by it. It's inconvenient, this new perspective." Christine resumed brushing, giving her hands something to do while her heart hammered against her ribs. "My mother died in a fire 8 years ago, our house. Electrical fault, they said, but it spread so fast. She was already outside when she realized Shadow was still inside. She ran back in." Christine's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "They found her in the hallway near his room. She never made it out, and Shadow was just gone. Stolen during the chaos, probably. I spent a year looking before I had to accept I'd lost them both." "But you didn't lose him," Dominic said softly. "He was here, being turned into a weapon. By someone you paid." The accusation hung between them. "By someone I paid," Dominic acknowledged. "Which makes me complicit in his trauma, and yours." Shadow, sensing the emotional weight in the room, pressed closer against Christine's legs. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat. Alive, healing here. "You asked me once how I do this," Christine said. "How I reach him when professionals couldn't. It's because I don't see a weapon or an asset or a problem to solve. I see someone who survived something that should have destroyed him. Someone who learned violence as a language because gentleness was beaten out of him. I see myself." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that felt invasive and intimate simultaneously. "You survived something that should have destroyed you too." "We all did." Christine met his gaze steadily. "The question is what we build with what's left." Dominic stood in one fluid movement and crossed the space between them before Christine could process the intention. He knelt in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, close enough that his proximity made her breath catch. Shadow growled, low warning, but didn't move to intervene. "You're terrifying, do you know that?" Dominic's voice was rough, stripped of its usual control. "You walk into cages, you trust broken things, you look at monsters and see trauma victims. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or you have a death wish." "Maybe both," Christine whispered. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers traced her jawline with surprising gentleness, a touch that spoke of someone relearning how to be careful with fragile things. "I haven't trusted anyone in 15 years, Dominic said. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford, but you make me want to remember what it felt like before I learned better." Christine's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Dominic." He kissed her, not the consuming, demanding kiss she might have expected from a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, but something tentative and questioning. A request, not an order. His lips were warm against hers, tasting of espresso and something darker she couldn't name. Christine's mind screamed warnings about power dynamics and captivity and men who built empires on violence. But her body responded to the gentleness underneath his control, the vulnerability in how he waited for her to kiss him back before deepening the contact. When they finally broke apart, Shadow was watching them with his head tilted, confusion clear in his yellow eyes. "That was a mistake," Christine said, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. "Probably," Dominic agreed. His thumb traced her lower lip. "Will you make it again?" "I don't know," Christine said honestly. "Ask me when I'm not technically your employee in a situation where saying no might have consequences." Dominic pulled back immediately, something like hurt flashing across his face before the armor slammed back into place. "I would never." "I know," and somehow, impossibly, she did. "But the power imbalance exists whether you'd use it or not, which means we can't do this. Not here, not like this." Dominic stood, distance and control reasserting themselves in his posture. "Then I'll wait until the power is equal, however long that takes." He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss White, Christine, you're the first person in 15 years who's made me want to be someone who deserves trust instead of someone who doesn't need it. He left her alone with Shadow and the ghost of a kiss that felt like both a promise and a threat. Shadow whimpered and pressed his nose against her palm. I know, Christine whispered. I'm scared too. The news reached Cross Manor at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, delivered by Marco's clipped voice over the intercom system that connected every room. Code Black. All personnel to secure positions. Sir, you're needed immediately. Christine woke to Shadow's low growl and the sound of footsteps in the hallway, not the measured pace of staff, but the rapid deployment of people trained for violence. She pulled on clothes and emerged from her suite to find the penthouse transformed into a war room. Guards she'd never seen before occupied strategic positions. Valentina stood near the windows with a phone pressed to her ear, her face carved from ice. And Dominic. Dominic stood in the center of the chaos, wearing the expression of someone who just watched a match strike near gasoline. Cold, utterly controlled, more terrifying in his stillness than Marco's barely contained fury. What happened? Christine asked, though part of her didn't want to know. The Volkov family happened. Marco's voice was tight with rage. They hit the restaurant in Brooklyn. 17 civilians dead, including a family with 2 children. They left a message spray-painted on the wall. Cross grows soft. Christine's stomach turned to ice. Oh, God. God has nothing to do with this. Dominic's voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. This is business. Alexei Volkov saw an opportunity, my attention divided, resources allocated to non-essential projects, and decided to test whether the rumors of weakness were true. Non-essential projects, Christine repeated, understanding flooding through her. You mean me, Shadow. I mean a month of reduced aggression, of visible distraction, of behaving in ways that deviate from 15 years of established patterns. Dominic turned to face her, and his eyes held nothing of the man who'd kissed her in the kennel 6 days ago. This was the other Dominic, the one built from his father's betrayal and his mother's murder. Alexei interpreted mercy as vulnerability. He's about to learn the difference. Sir, Valentina lowered her phone. I have confirmation on 3 Volkov locations. Warehouses, mostly. Light security. We can hit all 3 simultaneously. No, Dominic's voice cut through her planning like a blade. We don't hit warehouses. We hit what matters. His daughter's gallery opening is Saturday. His son's penthouse. His wife's charity foundation. We make him understand that softness is when I only killed his soldiers. Hardness is when I erase everything he loves. The room went silent. Even Marco, who Christine had learned possessed approximately 0 moral boundaries, looked unsettled. Dominic, Christine said carefully, those are civilian targets. So was my restaurant. He didn't even look at her. Marco, I want plans for all 3 locations within the hour. Valentina, draft the legal coverage, make sure nothing traces back directly. And someone get me Alexei's schedule for the next 72 hours. I want him to watch everything burn before I put him in the ground. Christine moved into his line of sight, forcing him to acknowledge her. 17 people died tonight. Your response is to kill 17 more? 20? How many bodies does it take before you've satisfied your need for revenge? This isn't revenge. Dominic's expression didn't change. This is instruction. Alexei needs to learn what happens when you mistake distraction for weakness. Everyone watching needs to remember why they don't test me. You've spent 15 years becoming exactly what you hated, Christine said, her voice rising. Your father ruled through fear and violence, so you killed him and built an empire on the same foundation. You learned that betrayal has consequences, so you made sure no one gets close enough to betray you. You watched your mother die, so now you make sure you're always the one holding the gun. When does it end, Dominic? How much blood before you've proven whatever you're trying to prove? The temperature in the room plummeted. Marco's hand moved toward his weapon. Valentina took a careful step backward. And Dominic looked at Christine with something that might have been rage or might have been recognition that she just said the thing no one else dared to voice. This is not your concern, he said quietly. Shadow is my concern, and you promised me he'd be safe here. But if you start a war, then you'll stay out of it and let me handle. The explosion cut him off. Not close, several blocks away, judging by the delayed sound, but unmistakably violent. The windows rattled. Somewhere in the penthouse, glass shattered. And then another explosion, closer this time. Close enough that Shadow started barking from Christine's suite, close enough that the guards drew weapons and Marco was already shouting coordinates into his comm. "They're hitting us," Valentina said, her voice ice-calm despite the chaos. "Sir, we need to move you to the secure room." "No." Dominic's eyes were fixed on the windows, on the orange glow blooming against the night sky. "That's not shrapnel, that's fire. They're using incendiaries." Christine's world tilted sideways. Fire. They were using fire. The smell hit her a moment later, smoke filtering through ventilation systems, acrid and familiar and wrong in ways that bypassed her conscious mind and went straight to the part of her brain that still remembered her mother's funeral, that still woke gasping from dreams of flames. "Christine!" Dominic's hand was on her arm, his voice cutting through the panic rising in her throat. "Look at me, breathe." But she couldn't breathe. The smoke was getting thicker, and somewhere in her sweet Shadow was barking with increasing desperation, and the sprinklers had activated, raining water that looked like it was falling through flames, and she was 12 years old again, standing outside her house while firefighters told her about smoke inhalation and how her mother wouldn't have suffered long. "We need to evacuate," Marco was saying. "Get her and the dog to the vehicles." "The kennel," Christine gasped. "Shadow, he's in the kennel, I have to." "The fire's between here and your suite," Valentina said sharply. "We can't." Christine was already moving. Years of waitressing had taught her to navigate chaos, to find paths through impossible crowds. She used that now, ducking under Marco's grab, pushing past guards who were focused on Dominic. The hallway was filling with smoke, the sprinklers creating a rain that turned everything slick and treacherous. Behind her, Dominic's voice. "Christine, stop." But she couldn't stop. Shadow was trapped behind reinforced doors he couldn't open, in a space designed to contain him, and fire didn't care about training or progress or the month they'd spent teaching him to trust again. Fire consumed everything. The door to her suite was hot to the touch. Christine used her shirt to protect her hand, twisted the handle, and stumbled into air thick enough to choke on. Shadow's barking had turned to something worse, a howling panic that matched the terror clawing through her own chest. The kennel's exterior door was also locked, accessed by keypad. Christine's shaking fingers input the code, once, twice, the third time successful, and the door slid open, releasing Shadow in a terrified rush. He crashed into her hard enough to knock her down, his body trembling, his eyes wild. "I've got you," Christine coughed, her arms wrapping around him. "I've got you, baby. We're okay. We're..." The ceiling made a sound like bones breaking. Christine looked up in time to see a section of it collapse, fire blooming through the gap like something alive and hungry. Shadow yelped and pulled, trying to drag her toward the exit, but the path they'd come through was an inferno now. They were trapped. Christine's vision narrowed to a tunnel. Her mother had been trapped like this, had made the choice to run toward danger instead of away from it, had died in a hallway trying to save the creature Christine now held in her arms. History repeating itself, trauma come full circle. "No," Christine whispered, then louder, "no." She forced herself to stand, to think past the panic. The windows, floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass designed to keep threats out, but that could be broken from the inside. Shadow was already moving toward them, his survival instincts overriding his trauma. Christine grabbed a chair, expensive, heavy, designed more for aesthetics than function, and hurled it at the glass with every ounce of strength fear had given her. The first impact created a spiderweb of cracks. The second shattered it outward into the night air. They were 30 stories up. The fire escape was 15 feet to the right, accessible if you were willing to edge along a 6-inch ledge with nothing but determination and terror keeping you alive. Christine looked at Shadow. Shadow looked at her with yellow eyes that held perfect trust. Together, she said. They went through the window into smoke and night and the possibility of falling, but also, finally, toward air and survival and the choice to fight for life instead of surrendering to the flames that had taken so much already. Behind them, the suite exploded in a fireball that lit the Manhattan skyline like a second sun. And Christine, clinging to a ledge with Shadow pressed against her side and tears streaming down her smoke-stained face, made a choice. She chose to live. Dominic reached them on the ledge 30 seconds before Christine's grip would have failed. He came through a window she hadn't known existed, suspended by climbing gear that suggested he'd prepared for scenarios exactly this insane, and pulled them both through into a stairwell that smelled like concrete and salvation. Christine collapsed against the wall, Shadow pressed against her chest, both of them coughing smoke and shaking with adrenaline. Dominic knelt in front of them, his hands moving over Christine with clinical efficiency, checking for injuries while his face remained a mask of controlled fury. "You could have died," he said, his voice raw. "You ran toward fire you could have." "So could you," Christine interrupted, meeting his eyes. "You came after me." Something passed between them in that moment, recognition of the choice they'd both made, the instinct to run toward danger when someone you cared about was in it. Shadow whimpered and licked Christine's face, then tentatively licked Dominic's hand, as if including him in whatever pack they'd formed in the crucible of smoke and flame. Marco's voice crackled through Dominic's calm. "Sir, the fire department's here. Volkov's men retreated when they realized you weren't inside. We have 3 in custody." Dominic's expression hardened. "Keep them alive, I have questions." He helped Christine stand, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to give out. "And Marco, call Special Agent Rivera at the FBI. Tell him I'm ready to make the deal we've been discussing." Christine looked up at him sharply. "What deal?" "The one where I give them everything they need to dismantle the Volkov organization, trafficking routes, money laundering operations, evidence of at least 14 murders, in exchange for immunity and a very quiet exit from the business my father built." Dominic's voice was steady, but his hand trembled slightly where it rested on Christine's shoulder. "You asked me when it ends. The answer is now, tonight. Because you're right. I've spent 15 years becoming what I hated, and watching you run into fire to save a dog taught me that some things are worth more than empires built on fear." The FBI came at dawn, along with fire investigators and enough federal agents to make Marco's trigger finger twitch with paranoia. Christine gave her statement from a blanket in the back of an ambulance, while paramedics treated her smoke inhalation, and Shadow sat pressed against her legs, refusing to leave her side. She watched Dominic stand in the ruins of his penthouse, directing agents to evidence caches, dismantling in hours what had taken him years to build. Valentina appeared beside the ambulance with coffee that tasted like heaven and efficiency that suggested she'd anticipated this outcome. "He's been preparing this exit strategy for 6 months," she said quietly. "Since the week you arrived, actually. Watching you with the dog, watching you refuse to accept that violence was the only language available, it changed something in him, made him remember there were other ways to have power." "What happens now?" Christine asked. "Now he becomes legitimate. Cross-security solutions, personal protection, corporate security consulting, all the skills he's developed applied to legal ends. The properties get restructured, the questionable assets get liquidated, and Dominic Cross becomes just another wealthy entrepreneur with a complicated past." Valentina's smile was sharp. "It'll take time. Legal restructuring always does, but he's committed. You made him want something more than survival." 6 months later, Christine stood in an art gallery in Chelsea that had been converted into event space for the evening, wearing a dress that cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent and feeling only slightly ridiculous about it. The invitation had been simple: cross-security solutions, grand opening, cocktails and conversation, black tie optional. Shadow, no one called him Nero anymore, sat beside her in a vest that identified him as a therapy animal in training, perfectly behaved except for the way his tail thumped whenever Dominic entered his line of sight. The transformation was remarkable. The scarred, traumatized weapon had become a gentle giant who spent his days visiting hospitals and schools, teaching children that even broken things could heal. Dominic worked the room with the same controlled grace he'd once used to command criminal enterprises, but now he wore it differently. Lighter. He caught Christine's eye across the crowd and smiled. Not the cold thing from before, but something genuine that still took her breath away. "Your boyfriend's starring," Sophia said, appearing at Christine's elbow with a champagne flute she definitely shouldn't have at 16, but that Christine was too happy to confiscate. Her sister looked healthy, confident, wearing her private school uniform like armor and carrying college brochures like weapons. "It's disgusting. Also romantic. Mostly disgusting." "He's not my boyfriend," Christine said automatically, though the ring hidden in her purse, found on her pillow that morning with a note that said "only when you're ready," suggested Dominic had other ideas. The evening wound down around midnight. Guests departed, staff cleaned up, and Christine found Dominic on the balcony overlooking the city, Shadow at his feet. "I have something to show you," Dominic said, pulling up images on his tablet. Building plans, architectural renderings. A converted warehouse in Brooklyn with spaces designed for kennels, training areas, veterinary suites. The first Cross Animal Recovery Center, opening in 3 months, specifically for traumatized animals, abuse cases, fighting dogs, creatures the system has given up on. Christine stared at the plans, at the spaces designed with the same care and attention Dominic had once applied to security systems and criminal enterprises. "This is your mother's legacy," Dominic said quietly. "She ran into fire to save a life. Now we're going to save hundreds, thousands eventually. We'll expand to other cities, create a network, prove that trauma doesn't have to be permanent." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a good man, Christine. I've done things that can't be forgiven, but you taught me that what we build matters more than what we were. So I want to build something that matters with you, if you'll have me." Christine pulled the ring box from her purse. "You're supposed to ask first." "I'm terrible at following rules." But his hands shook as he took the box, as he opened it to reveal a band of platinum and emeralds the exact color of Shadow's eyes in sunlight. "Christine White, will you marry a former crime lord who's trying very hard to deserve you?" "Yes," Christine said, because some choices were easy. "But the wedding's in the kennel where this all started, and Shadow's the ring bearer." Done. They married on a Tuesday in April, in the space that had once held a weapon and now held only love. Shadow wore a bow tie and carried the rings with perfect dignity. Sophia cried. Valentina gave a speech that was mostly threats about what would happen if Dominic made Christine unhappy. Marco looked uncomfortable in formal wear, but showed up anyway. And 6 months after that, Christine and Dominic stood in front of the Cross Animal Recovery Center's entrance, scissors in hand, Shadow between them wearing a collar of white roses. The ribbon was red, the color of blood and violence and everything they'd survived. Cutting it felt like severing the past. "Ready?" Dominic asked. Christine looked at the building, at the second chances waiting inside, at the transformation of violence into healing, at the future they'd built from ashes and trauma, and the stubborn refusal to accept that broken things couldn't be made whole. "Ready," she said. They cut the ribbon together. Shadow barked once, joyful, free, and led them inside. Behind them, the city continued its chaos. But here, in this space carved from Dominic's past and Christine's grief, something new was growing. Not perfect, not without scars, but alive and healing and proof that even monsters could learn gentleness if someone loved them enough to show them light. Shadow found the light, and in doing so, he'd illuminated the path for everyone else.